Hello, hello, hello. Good evening. Nick here, creator of Hayes Reviews, and tonight we're going to be reading Chapter 6 from The Romance of the Rothschilds, and this is all about the Frankfurt House. Hope you're all doing well out there. If anybody is tuning in live, please give me a thumbs up and a hello. Adamski, hello, good evening. Awesome. Thank you for being here. I assume that means I'm coming through loud and clear, which is good news. Good evening. Hope you can all see me okay. Right, let's get into it then. So we've done the first 5 chapters, and we've learned about Meyer Amschel Rothschild and his 5 sons and the different places he sent them to. London. The last chapter we read was all about Naples. We read about France, and tonight we're focusing on the Frankfurt House. So Frankfurt is where it all began. It's where it all started. So it should be a pretty interesting chapter, I would think. Hello to Elizabeth Kendall. Just before we get into the book tonight, though, I've got a couple of other artifacts here that I would like to show you. Oh, Heidi as well. Hello. Good evening. So let me just... So if you look at the chat, I just put a message in the top there because this is actually going to be our penultimate chapter, which means one before the last one. And we've only got chapter 7 left after this, and we'll have done the book. We've ripped through it, and you can see those nice golden pages at the top there, shimmering. But yeah, we're 2 chapters left, and so it's time to start planning and preparing for the next book that we're going to read through and learn from on the channel. And so what I've done is in my Telegram group, I've put up a poll to ask people what they would like to would like to go through next on this channel. So if I just go to my handy cam here, you can see the poll. There it is. So the 3 books that I picked are The Story of the Rockefeller Foundation by Raymond B. Fosdick. He was like the chairman, the president of the Rockefeller Foundation. So it's the approved the approved version of what happened, but there's some apparently some pretty interesting admissions in there. And so that's 1952 that book came out. So I thought that would be a good one to get on the record because it's kind of in their own words type thing. And quite often the most damning evidence we have for the big agendas that are going on in the world are the books that they've written themselves about their plans. So in the case of H.G. Wells, we had The Open Conspiracy. We already went through that. In this case, it wasn't written by a Rothschild, but at some point, I'm sure we'll get around to reading the ones that are, because I have a few of those. But I thought, a bit of a change of pace and looking at another influential family, the Rockefellers, might be a good thing to do. Secondly, I got The Lusitania by Colin Simpson. This is a 1972 book all about the Lusitania and the attack on the ship, the Lusitania. What was it doing there? What was the cargo? Was the official narrative and story put out telling us the truth? Spoiler alert, probably not. Like many of these things, there's more to the story. Colin Simpson has written a book about it kind of after the fact, sort of telling us there's a lot of shady stuff around that particular event, which kind of changed the course of history. So that was the second book. And thirdly, I looked at Has Man a Future by Bertrand Russell, which is a 1961 book. It's one of those ones that I found in a secondhand bookshop, and I just grabbed it because it was a first edition. It was like £3 or something, just sitting there. So why would I not grab it? And so Bertrand Russell, a big lauded scientist, but raving eugenicist and advocate of the scientific technocracy that we're now kind of seeing unfolded, and we're trying to explore and talk about and point to and raise awareness of. So if you want to have a say and a pick, you can see there's been 7 votes already. And if you want to get in on that and have an influence on what we do next on the channel, then you can join the Telegram group if you use it. If you don't use it, I haven't found another way to count your votes yet, so sorry about that. But you can get in, if you use Telegram, you can get in there, join the group, and there's a little chat going on. We've got a bit of back and forth, which is really nice, people sharing voice messages and kind of alerting each other to different creators and books and sources and avenues for learning and exploration on these kinds of topics. So that is that. If you want to get involved and have a influence and an impact on what we do here, that is how you can do it. The other thing is this article. So this series of streams is really for reading from books, but I wanted to get this article on the record before we finish this chapter today, which is November the 10th, 2022. And this is Evelyn de Rothschild, banking heir and advisor to the Queen, dies at 91 years old. So people out there might be like, Nick, why are you reading this Rothschild book? It's an old book. Who cares? Who are they? What? They're just a bunch of bankers. So what? Well, this group of bankers, this family, are incredibly powerful and have really been very close to other powerful families and institutions, and this is admitted in the mainstream. So this is the Washington Post, right? And this is a year and a bit old now, and there's some pretty interesting stuff in here. So Evelyn de Rothschild, he controlled the British wing of the family's empire for nearly 3 decades. He advised Queen Elizabeth II on financial matters. So he's giving advice to the Queen. So we can tell, like his ancestors, like Nathan before him, becoming incredibly close to the royal families, loaning them money, giving them advice, and being relied on for their steer on things. It said he died. It was admitted in the Rothschild archive, but interestingly, there was no cause announced. So who knows why? That's interesting. To me, at least, why is there not a cause? Usually, if it's like a tabloid newspaper, someone's died, or some celebrity, there's always some sort of focus and some sort of like rumor mill going on about the death and the cause of death and why it happened and how it happened and all that stuff. But in this case, nope, not a word. So maybe he just went back to his lair underground to resurface in another 100 years or something. I don't know. But interesting nevertheless. So he took control of N.M. Rothschild and Sons back in 1976, and he operated it in the spirit of his forefathers. And it says he took a more cautious route, executing corporate finance deals forged through personal relationships. So we've been learning a little bit about the personal relationships of this family in the other chapters of this book. In the last chapter, we were hearing about how one of the Baroness Rothschilds was telling off the Pope. And there was another Rothschild, Karl, who was redeeming a disgraced member of the Medici family and bringing him back into the fold and giving him a lucrative position as a finance minister or something. So these personal relationships, presumably with other extremely powerful oligarchic families who have sort of generational wealth built up through pulling the levers of power over time and ripping the rest of us off, basically. So this guy, Evelyn, the Queen knighted him in 1989. And he spent one of his 3 honeymoons in President Bill Clinton's White House. So he's using the White House as a hotel. The family's role in English life was immense. The Rothschilds financed the British Army in the Napoleonic Wars, and later the purchase of the Suez Canal. So very just mainstream, uncontroversial admissions there about the role that they've played historically. Yet, are they in any secondary school history textbooks, or are they on any university courses about history? I don't know. I don't think so. So the reason I wanted to bring up this article and that I found it was because after I think the last episode we did, or maybe the one before, we had a bit of a conversation in the comments underneath about this picture, because I'd mentioned that there was a picture of Prince Charles, now King. I'm going to call him the King formerly known as Prince Charles, getting poked in the chest by a Rothschild. And so it turned out to be Evelyn de Rothschild, the man who died, who this article is about. There he is on the right, standing at a 6'2", 6'3", something like that. And the comment underneath was saying, well, without the context and knowing what was said and what was going on, we can only jump to conclusions about what's going on in this picture. And I said, yes, you're right, because we don't know what was going on in this picture, but just take a look at the facial expressions here. And, it's side profile. We can't have a full and complete view of the facial expressions, but the comment that somebody put underneath the video was maybe Evelyn de Rothschild is just complimenting him on his suit and tie. And the king formerly known as Prince Charles here doesn't look like he's receiving a compliment to me. He looks like he's being told and put in his place. He looks like he's receiving some sort of dressing down, even though he is very well dressed, And if you look at Evelyn's face, he kind of looks, he has a sort of a, maybe a smug or a grin or a bit of a, he's not even looking the king formerly known as Prince in the eye, is he? He's kind of looking down at him, almost like a, you do as I tell you. That's what I think. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, in the chat. Get some discussions going. I'll check in with the chat a bit later on in the after we've done the reading. But yeah, make your own mind up. What do you think is going on here? And I was thinking about this gesture of poking someone in the chest right there, right? Just kind of where the heart is. I was thinking, have I ever done that to anybody? And under what circumstances would I do that? And so the answer to those questions, the first one was no, I don't think I have ever done that to anybody. And then the circumstances when would I do that? I couldn't think of, I can't, even with people I'm close to, who I'm my wife or my family, or, maybe a child as a joking kind of, you do what I tell you. I don't know. What do you think? Open questions here. I'm not sort of trying to jump to conclusions. I'm just trying to interpret a piece of mainstream photographic evidence. And that's kind of what I get from this picture. But what do you get? Let me know. That'd be, I think, a good, interesting thing to explore and talk about. So a little more detail about this gentleman. And then we find out that he managed to grow the firm's assets from 40 million to 4.6 billion. And this was after... it said somewhere further up here, but maybe I didn't highlight it. He joined the business in 1961, and then he became chairman by 1976. So it looks like he put in a good 15 years of working his way up and graft, I guess. But that's a hell of a... That's massive growth, isn't it? Really. Working closely with the Conservative Party, including Margaret Thatcher, Mr. Rothschild and his firm organized the government sale of British gas and the privatization of oil, gas, and electric companies. Now, I guess that's one for the comments, or one for you to talk about whether you think that was a good thing, a good outcome. Has the gas and the oil and the electric and all that been going in the right direction, more available, more abundant, cheaper, more affordable for the average person, or not? Of course, these are not the only factors, but it's kind of the factor that matters most to most people, isn't it? Like, are your bills going up or down? So that was quite a interesting tidbit. What else we got? Oh, so he married Lynn Forrester, a New York businesswoman who was introduced to him by Mr. Heinz Kissinger, their mutual friend. Oh, friend. So another name drop there, another kind of bastard, for want of a better word. He served on numerous boards, including The Economist, so that's kind of telling us about the influence over publishing and print publishing in particular, and a lot of businessmen and a lot of bankers read this Economist magazine. I think I was just in a supermarket earlier, and I picked up a copy of The Economist, and it had a really weird. Well, National Geographic has got a special at the minute, which is the story of Jesus. And The Economist, I forget what was on the front of. Oh no, sorry, it wasn't The Economist. It was a Spectator. My bad. But yeah, National Geographic is running a special on the story of Jesus. If you want to pick that up and have a look at that, so there you are. There you have it. So that is my little sort of intro to this particular reading. I hope that was useful and helpful and interesting. But cool, we got a bit of action. Gwen's back. Hello, Gwen. Good evening to you. Yeah, listen. Yeah. So Heidi EB says, "Poke, poke. Listen to me, Bucko." That's what the picture looks like, isn't it? Adamski says, "Haha, nice suit." And that ain't no tie face. Yeah, nice. Giving a bit of criticism and advice. Yeah, it certainly looks to me like he doesn't look like he's talking to someone higher than him. Let's say in the pecking order, in the hierarchy. He certainly seems to be. I mean, he's tall, so that could be why he's talking down. right? So that's what it seems to me anyway. So yeah, that's kind of a little intro, a little preamble to today's reading and today's episode. I'm just going to move a few things around on my screens so I can do this properly. Reload that, and then we will get right over to the book cam, which is here. Okay, so hopefully that's going through loud and clear, and you can see. So Romance of the Rothschilds, you should all know by now it's 110 years old. I've mentioned it enough times. And it seems to be, we've kind of come to the conclusion that it seems to be a kind of puff piece. It's very praising. It's very building this kind of mythos, this sort of legendary status, and the incredible business acumen and the unbelievable fortitude of these hardworking and noble and generous philanthropic family. So it's a lot of that. So if you're here for for the detail and the down and the dirty on the kind of all the dodgy stuff this family's done, you're not going to get it from this guy. But don't worry, we have other books and other sources if you want the juicy details. All right, so I hope that's coming through clear. All right, cool. So, chapter 6, the Frankfurt House. After the death of Meyer Amschel, his eldest son, Anselm Meyer, became the head of the Frankfurt House. Anselm was a businessman in body and soul. That was his chief characteristic. In point of fact, however, he had also the advantage of that important element of commercial life, luck, and this... he had also the advantage of that important element of commercial life, luck, and this made his work considerably easier. He did not, of course, rely blindly on his luck, but was always very prudent and cautious, and never based his calculations on the favour of fortune. His concern was rather to grasp the favourable moments which arise in political and commercial life. He followed the course of events with close attention, and endeavoured to take every possible advantage of political and economic conditions. That was his first principle in business, and his luck consisted in the fact that events afforded him so many opportunities for the application of his principle. Anselm Meyer Rothschild very closely resembled his mother in character, cast of mind, and simple ways of life. He maintained this plainness throughout life, even when honours and dignities had been heaped upon him. Less than a year after he had undertaken the control of the Frankfurt Bank, he received the title of Royal Prussian Privy Commercial Councillor, and 3 years afterwards, in 1816, he was raised to the Austrian nobility with his brothers. The year 1820 brought him a new title. He was made Bavarian consul for the city of Frankfurt and official court banker. Old Meyer Amschel, who had been put to the rest in the Jewish cemetery scarcely 10 years before, can hardly have dreamed that his sons would become barons in so short a time. Anselm, however, set no store by his title of Baron of the Austrian Empire. He was interested in nothing but business, and took no pleasure in anything but large financial operations. As the eldest of the 5 brothers, he often expressed a concern lest the later generation, seduced by a desire for titles and dignities, display and luxury, should depart more and more from the spirit of the elders. Interesting that we just saw that similar sort of concept in the article we read about Evelyn, that he ran it in the, what did it say, the spirit of, it didn't say spirit of the elders, did it, but ancestors or something. He sometimes bitterly reproached his brothers, especially Karl, who was very partial to display. The Neapolitan Rothschild once spoke in Anselm's presence of his sons as the young barons. "Don't talk to me of young barons," said Anselm angrily. "Drop the expression. Take care, rather, that your young dignitaries become honest and hard-working businessmen. Their title will never bring them in a farthing." He cared nothing for external things, spent his early years in an intense application to work, and was consequently deficient in education. In later years, he tried to improve himself in history and languages, and even took to gymnastics. But when anyone attempted to praise his riding, he promptly turned his back on the flatterer. He spoke French and German badly, as he had been compelled to learn these languages in middle age, and, in fact, his choice of expressions was not much better in German. On the artistic side, he was interested in antique metalwork and small sculpture, and he often passed very sound opinions on pictures. His chief interest, however, was in his garden, where he loved to walk. All these peculiarities and faults he retained until his 8th decade of life, an interesting example of a type that is now dying out. He was eccentric throughout life, and never really enjoyed his great fortune. A young Parisian who was once entertained by him said to him, when he was leaving and wished to thank him for his hospitality, "Ah, if one only had the good fortune to change places with you, Herr Baron." A shadow came over the face of Anselm Rothschild, and he replied gravely and thoughtfully, "My dear friend, no one would be more willing to effect the exchange than I, if it were possible. Listen to me. You admire my horses. It is certainly a great pleasure to me to ride, but my physicians have long forbidden me to do so. My stomach and digestive organs will not permit it. As to the pleasures of the table, I generally pay for them with very painful consequences when at any time I have yielded to my inclinations. I am completely insensitive to the smell of flowers, and so am deprived myself of the great pleasure which my conservatories give to other people. My business activity prevents me from appreciating properly the pictures and statues that adorn my house. The one creature that I ever really loved, I have never been able to call mine. In a word, all that I get out of wealth is the duty of preserving and increasing it. Now, tell me, are you still anxious to change places with me?" End quote. These somber words give us a glimpse of the soul of Baron Anselm. He was not the master, but the slave of his vast fortune. And what must have been particularly painful for him was the consciousness that he was not his own master, even in his inmost experiences, to say nothing of his professional duties. He had to sacrifice his life and every enjoyment, even love, to the pitiless god Mammon. Here's a picture of him, if you want to have a look there. And that is Anselm Meyer. See if we can zoom in a little bit. Any particularly fetching or memorable characteristics? He's got really, really big eyes. The remark that he could never call his own the one being whom he had ever loved exposes his wound to us. Even in his grey and apparently bloodless old age, this wound inflicted by love was never healed. He had loved with all the ardor of his young heart in early life, and had been compelled by his father to sacrifice his passion. It is not known who it was that thus won the heart of the later head of the Frankfurt house. The family chronicles are silent on that point. We may suppose that the maiden belonged to some poor Jewish family, otherwise the father would not have been so sternly opposed. Thus, the first victim of Meyer Amschel's domestic and matrimonial policy was his eldest son, whose happiness he sacrificed to the fortune of the house. Anselm bowed to his father's orders and controlled his feelings in the interest of the family. How much suffering it cost him we can gather from the confession in his old age, which shows how keenly he still remembered the love of his youth. At that time, he was married to Eva Hanno, whom his father had chosen for him. No children were born of this loveless marriage, contracted in the interest of the family. It is possible that the childlessness of his wife contributed to the morose disposition of Baron Anselm, whose home was never brightened by the laughter of the young. He therefore devoted himself entirely to business and passed his life without knowing what real joy is. A contemporary who lived in the vicinity of Baron Anselm and had good opportunity to observe him writes as follows: Meyer Anselm von Rothschild is the eldest of the European nabobs, a man of thoroughly oriental physiognomy, with old Hebrew ways and habits. His hat is pushed back onto his neck, his hair is white as snow, his expression is, on the whole, one of candor, even when he assumes a more cheerful expression if he notices that he is observed. His coat is open, as a rule, and does not rest neatly on the shoulders, but falls negligently over them. His hands are always in his trousers pockets, playing with money. He generally goes on foot and gives money generously to every beggar he meets, never less than a sixpence. He has a strong feeling of philanthropy. The poorer Jewish families of Frankfurt live largely on his benefactions, and he gave the greater part of the money for the new Jewish hospital. In times of great cold or after a fire, he is always ready to give large sums. When there is any widespread distress, quite a crowd gathers in the street in front of his bank. His house in the Fahrgasse has not an impressive exterior, and a passing stranger would never suspect that it was the residence of the wealthiest businessman in the world. From a kind of superstition, he still keeps his offices in the house. He feels that luck might desert him if he left the house. There, he sits like a padishah among his clerks on a raised platform, his secretaries at his feet, and his clerks and agents bustling about. He gives his opinion on everything in a few words. Being a commercial genius of the first rank, he can decide instantly on any offer, oral or written, and when once he has given his brief decision, nothing in the world will induce him to say another word about the matter. No one is ever allowed to speak privately to him about business. Everything is discussed openly in the office, as in the old Rhine courts. He observes the hours of business as punctually as his clerks, and takes even less relief than they. Even when he goes to the theatre, he is almost always called out because some courier has arrived. In the same way, he is summoned from bed nearly every night to read dispatches and perhaps send messages to Vienna, Paris, or London. He has a small desk for the purpose beside his bed. He has a number of titles and decorations, but as a rule only wears the ribbon of the Hesse court and likes to be addressed simply as Herr Baron. The diplomatists who are accredited to Frankfurt and all who pass through the city treat him with great distinction, and great dinners are exchanged. But as Rothschild only eats kosher meat, he does not at all enjoy these banquets. This strict and sincere adherence to the prescriptions of his religion does him great credit. He is regarded as the strictest Jew in Frankfurt. I have never seen any man so distressed, beat his breast so much, and implore the mercy of heaven as Baron Rothschild on the long day in the synagogue. He often faints from the strain of the interminable prayers and song, and strong-smelling plants from his garden are then brought and put under his nose to bring him round. I thought he couldn't smell plants. In earlier years, he inflicted severe mortification on himself in order to prevail upon heaven to grant him a child, but it was of no avail. End quote. He was 82 years old when he died, on December the 6th, 1855, working with great vigor of mind until the end. Work and the exercise of charity were the only things which gave him pleasure. In his will, he left £100,000 to the Jewish community to be distributed in small sums, and gave other generous sums to the poor. He used to say, "The poor on the streets are my servants," and he never passed a beggar without giving him something. He had inherited this practice from his father. In his will, he directed that the poor families of Jew Street should receive weekly assistance. An anonymous writer published the following portrait of him after his death. Quote, Rothschild was, apart from his commercial position, which we are unable to judge, a man of penetrating intelligence and wonderful knowledge of men. A remarkable instinct enabled him to form the most accurate opinion even of people whose cast of thought and intellectual interests were very different from his own. He could detect vanity, hypocrisy, and inward emptiness under any veil of learning or accomplishment. The solid nucleus was everything to him, and he treated with straight and sincere men on an equal footing. His knowledge of men often passed into disdain of men. That is easily understood. His sharp eye saw how everybody paraded his particular quality like a peacock's tail. The artist, his fame; the noble, his genealogy; the orator, his turns of speech. Sometimes with an obvious purpose, sometimes with obvious pride, but generally for the sake of some mean advantage. He had a great regard for the quiet and modest man who expressed his views candidly. He regarded personal interest as the mainspring of human conduct, yet did not question that there were many with idealistic tempers, that there were men here and there who had high and sincere thoughts apart from or even against their own interests. He was quite prepared to admit but he was not disposed to regard such men as clever. His conversation always seemed to be confiding, yet he contrived to give at the same time an impression of reserve. The language spoken by the Jews was particularly suitable for this equivocal expression. The speech they used in Frankfurt was understood by the Christian and was very effective in his mouth. He was quite aware of the somewhat droll character of his conversation and made good use of it to convey truths and corrections by way of a joke, when they might have offended if put in plainer words. The stories that are told of him in this connection all point to his possession of a level head and penetrating discernment. Sometimes he would express his sense impressions in very simple speech. Once, when a large company had gathered to do honor to Thorwaldsen, who was passing through Frankfurt, Rothschild said, looking at him, "You look so handsome, sir, that one would think you had made yourself." Thorwaldsen had to admit that he had never received a more original compliment. At the time of the celebration of his golden wedding, it was observed that he showed great skill and ease in saying an appropriate word of thanks to each of the invited guests, the humblest as well as the most distinguished. The old man was aristocratic only in the sense that, without any pronounced pride, he was conscious of his importance and power. His power, indeed, was not slight, since it secured for him in such abundance the things that men prize. He was not at all unwilling to talk about his humble beginning, his selling of old coins in hotels, his travelling on foot from office to office, his Friday evenings in the old house in Jew Street, where the meal consisted of white bread and roasted nuts. And he treated with profound disdain the pride of certain other parvenus. Political partisanship was foreign to him, except in the sense that business gave him a disposition in favor of the principles of peace and stability. We remember hearing him say on one occasion, "Men want liberty, and are only willing to obey when it is to their advantage. As a rule, however, it is best for them to obey." Anselm von Rothschild gave away an extraordinary amount of money in small sums. There may be many who think otherwise, because their own petitions were not answered to their satisfaction, but that feeling often leads to injustice. When begging letters for the poor or for contributions to institutions, churches, and other purposes come not by the dozen but by the 100 and even the 1,000, it is difficult for a man to distinguish accurately and impossible for him to have a personal sympathy in every case. His philanthropic feeling, so reminiscent of ancient Judaism, was based on a very plain philosophy, the motto of which was, "Live and let live." He had, in addition, a tactful appreciation of his position. He gave work to a great number and was always pleased to hear that some industrious little man was getting on. The poor sustained a heavy loss in him, and even the independent observer was forced to admit that a remarkable personality passed away in him. In intercourse with ladies, he maintained a sort of lively but not tactless gallantry to the end of his life. With all his eccentricities and defects, we recognized in him a son of the mighty 70s, one of those original characters that grow rarer every day. End quote. A good many anecdotes are told of Baron Anselm, for, in spite of his eccentricity and misanthropy, he liked wit and repartee. The well-known humorist Moritz Saphir once sent him a note couched in the following terms: "Herr Baron, send me 1,000 Gulden and forget me." Baron Rothschild sent the money with the witty reply, "I send herewith the sum you ask and have already forgotten you." Saphir was very pleased to get the money, which was about £80, but was annoyed that Rothschild had capped his wit. He swore that he would be avenged, with his own peculiar weapon, of course. Rothschild had probably forgotten the matter when he next met Saphir, who began to lament his material cares and described his financial distress in such moving terms that the Baron, who was at the bottom a soft-hearted man, began to sympathize with him. "Come to my place tomorrow," he said, "and I will give you 500 Gulden." Saphir, of course, went to his office on the following morning, and the financier received him with a friendly smile. "So, you have come for your money," he said. "No," replied Saphir energetically. "No?" repeated Rothschild in great surprise. "No," Saphir repeated. "I have not come for my money, Baron, but for yours." Another anecdote shows how notorious were the Baron's generosity and philanthropy. He went to Ems for the improvement of his health in the summer of 1832 and lodged on the first floor of the Romerburg, where there was likewise a young Uhlan officer who was also a baron. Rothschild became very friendly with him, and they one day went for a walk together along the road from the Baths to the Four Towers. Suddenly, Rothschild interrupted the conversation and stood still as a poorly dressed man appeared behind them, feeling in his pockets in a somewhat nervous way. The young Uhlan thought at first that it might be an assassin or robber with intentions on Rothschild's pockets or life, but he soon saw that the forbidding stranger wanted to give the Baron something, possibly a begging letter, instead of taking something from him. He therefore allowed the man to put his note into Rothschild's pocket, and the Baron quietly resumed the walk and the conversation. The sharp corner of the letter in his pocket behind was, however, a little inconvenient. He took it out, glanced at the writing, and put it in a better position, saying, "I know what it is." Apparently, he could tell by feeling it that it was a begging letter. They continued their walk along the road towards Koblenz and did not turn back until it was growing dusk. Then a ragged fellow pounced on Rothschild from the bushes and pressed against his breast some object that he held in his hand. The young officer was just about to throw himself on the aggressor when he noticed that it was not a pistol or a dagger that the man had in his hand, but a begging letter. He was so excited that he chose to deliver it in this extraordinary way. Rothschild had remained calm, as usual. He was quite accustomed to receive letters in that way. A third anecdote runs that Baron Anselm had invited a few friends to supper one warm evening, and the window opposite to his chair was left open. During dessert, just as they were cutting up a pineapple, a letter shot in through the open window to the astonishment of his guests and dropped on the Baron's plate. The guests stared, but the Baron quietly took a piece of gold from his pocket, wrapped it in the note without reading the note, and flung it halfway across the street. This original way of practicing charity amused his guests, but Rothschild was not at ease until he knew that his gift had reached its destination. He asked his guests to allow him to leave them for a moment, hurried to the window, and leaned out. After looking round for some time, he returned quietly to his seat, saying in a low tone of voice, "Placed." He had arranged a loan, and, though it would never be paid back, he instinctively wished to make sure that it had been safely negotiated. As an Orthodox Jew, he observed the Sabbath very strictly, but he had no objection to concluding business and receiving money on such days. At the time of the Aix Congress, for instance, he had to receive a sum of £20,000 from the state treasury on a Saturday evening, and he turned up at the proper time. When some wit who noticed him remarked that it was the Sabbath and that no Orthodox Jew should handle money or do business on that day, Rothschild answered, "One has not a chance every day of receiving £20,000. Bismarck knew Baron Anselm very well, and he gives us a very characteristic portrait of him in a few words. Quote, "He is a poor man in a palace, childless and a widower, deceived by all his people, even his fine Frenchified or Anglicized nephews and nieces who will inherit his fortune, treat him badly and ungratefully. He is, however, very assiduous in business, in spite of all that." End quote. Bismarck was very fond of Rothschild's stories and was personally acquainted with several members of the famous family. He liked and esteemed them and was equally amused by their eccentricities and their shrewd ways. He very often spoke of them at banquets in order to bring in some story about them. One of these stories, which very well illustrates the business principles of the Rothschilds, was told by Bismarck at a dinner in the following form. At that time, the head of an important grain firm was negotiating the purchase of a large quantity of wheat and thought that the price demanded by Baron Rothschild was excessive. He bargained for a considerable time and at last exclaimed in the heat of the struggle, "A rich man like you, Baron, does not need to ask the highest price for his goods." Baron Anselm laughed slyly at the corn merchant and said, "What? Is my wheat of less value because I am a rich man?" The reply is characteristic of the Baron's business principles. He counted every penny and acted as if his whole fortune depended on his making another £10 or so out of his wares. Bismarck, who recognized the character of the Rothschilds in these anecdotes, used also to tell a story about Prince Metternich and Baron Anselm. Once, when Metternich returned to his chateau at Johannesburg from Frankfurt, Rothschild made him a present of 6 bottles of excellent Johannesburg. It was the wine produced on Metternich's own estate, and, instead of drinking it, he called his butler and asked him how much a bottle it cost. £1, was the reply. Very good, said the prince. Put these bottles aside, and the next time Baron Rothschild orders any of this wine, send them to him, but add 3 guldens, which is 5 shillings, to the price, as the wine will then be older. Baron Anselm took great pride in his wines and his cuisine. Just as he sought the goodwill of Metternich by making him a present of costly wine, he once attempted to captivate the Emperor William I by the marvels of his cooking. According to Bismarck's account, William I was passing through Frankfurt, and the Chancellor invited the monarch to dine with him. When Baron Rothschild heard of this, he sent the Emperor a request that he might have the honour of finding him a dinner. William genially consented, but added that he had important matters to discuss with Bismarck, and hoped to do this during the dinner. If Rothschild did not mind this, he would be pleased to dine at his house. He felt that this would put an end to the Baron's project, but Rothschild was not so easily put off. He hastened to Bismarck and tried to persuade him to abandon his imperial guest to him, the Baron, and join them at dinner. Bismarck said that he would be pleased to do so, but it was impossible. Very well, said the Baron. If you will not dine with me, let me at least provide the dinner. I have one of the best cooks in the country. He will do everything, and, if I cannot be present, I shall at least have the pleasure of feeling that I provided the meal. Nothing came of the matter, of course, but years afterwards the Chancellor used to say in a tone of resignation when he recalled the episode, "Unfortunately, I could not comply with the Baron's request. It was a pity, as his dinner would certainly have been much better than mine." In view of the advanced age of Baron Anselm, it at length became necessary to arrange for a successor in the control of the Frankfurt Bank. Not having a son of his own, he chose the son of his Neapolitan brother, Karl, and the nephew lived with him in his later years in order to be initiated into the working of the complicated machinery of the business. This nephew, Baron Meyer Karl, who was then 35 years old, also inherited the uncle's private fortune, which was estimated at over 2 million sterling. Baron Meyer Karl conducted the business on the same lines as his uncle had done. He had, from his long sojourn in Italy, cultivated a fine taste for art, but he was none the less devoted to business, and his excellent qualities won for him so much regard at Frankfurt that he was elected a member of the Reichstag of the North German Alliance. He was careful in all things to carry out the wishes of the founder of the dynasty, Meyer Amschel, and married within the family, choosing Louisa, the daughter of his uncle Nathan, at London. His own daughter, he had no son, married a member of the family. In his domestic life, he was more fortunate than his uncle had been, and was free from eccentricity. The love of art and of business were happily reconciled in his nature, and he took pleasure in social life. He held a quiet and genial philosophy of life and did not allow himself to be disturbed by the conflicts and excitement of social life. His idea of business may be gathered from the reply he gave to a clerk who once asked him what a man ought to do to succeed on the exchange. "The thing is very simple," said Baron Meyer Karl. "We have merely to act as we do when we are taking a cold bath, quick in and quick out again." He not only preached this maxim, but acted on it, and owed the greater part of his successes to it. Yet his personal ability could not prevail against the change in the political and economic conditions. Frankfurt, once the focus of commerce, gradually lost its importance, and the Rothschild house declined with it. The financial position of states had greatly improved. They were no longer restricted to the Rothschilds in seeking loans, as the large company banks now entered the field. Baron Meyer Karl was able to maintain, to some extent, the position of the Frankfurt house by his own ability and exertions, but it lost its cosmopolitan significance when he died. He died in January 1887 in his 68th year. After his death, his brother William, who was 8 years younger than he, controlled the business of the Frankfurt house for a time, but at his death his widow Mathilda, granddaughter of Baron Solomon of Vienna, could not succeed in inducing the relatives to maintain the old firm. The head of the Vienna house, Baron Albert, supported his aunt in her request, but as none of the younger members of the family was disposed to undertake to manage it, the bank was closed by a family council. The house was thus closed less than 100 years since it had been founded by Meyer Amschel. No longer are ledgers kept in the rooms of the Rothschilds at Frankfurt, whence the sons of the house with the green shield has set out to conquer the world. No longer do the descendants of the young candidate for the rabbiship decide the fate of state loans. The rest is silence. That is chapter 6. Another short, snappy one. So we'll just take a minute now to go over to the chat and see what is going on over here. Let's have a look. What was that? Was that useful? Interesting? Enlightening? A few interesting bits in there for sure. I can't see the chat. It's not loading for some reason. But we've got 19 people watching. Hello to everyone. Thank you for being here. Very good to have you. Just went up by 1 to 20. Yeah, I apologize. I can't see the chat. This happened on other streams, didn't it? I had to load up a different browser. Oh, there it is. It just appeared. All right, what's going on? Hello, hello, hello. Malk says, we'll have to watch later, sorry, but enjoyed all chapters so far. Awesome, Malk. Oh, got a few hearts coming in there. Thank you very much, whoever's doing that. Heidi, Nadine de Rothschild influenced every upper-class housewife in Europe with her etiquette book. Ah, that might be a good one for me to get hold of and have a look at then, right? Sort of culturally influencing as well. That's not surprising. Gwen Weston says, good evening. Oh, yeah, I said good evening to you already. I think I already read that, didn't I? I'm not far wrong, says, hello there, kind sir. I have managed to catch one of your live broadcasts for once. Yeah, you're not far wrong. Exactly. You're here. It's good to have you here. Well done. I try to announce these, roughly 24 hours ahead of time, usually in the Telegram chat. So that's my, or I put it on Instagram as well, but I'm a bit better with Telegram than I am with Instagram, to be honest. Frank. Hey, Frank. Thanks, Nick. One fascinating book. This, despite that it may be a puff piece, a lot of good stuff in it nonetheless. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just, even if it is just, it's such a puff piece, isn't it? Like talking about how generous he was, how much he cared that his money was given to, but he sounds even from this that he was only really generous towards certain group of people. Humanity Lane says, gosh, sorry I'm late. That's all right. Late is better than never. Crikey, with all that so this is Frank Lennon says, crikey, with all that inbreeding, it's incredible that they always remain right on the money. I suppose it was all the fine uncles and fine aunts. Yeah, the inbreeding is quite surprising. And I know it was done in royal families and it's kind of common knowledge and accepted that royal families did it. But this family aren't royal, are they? So it's interesting how they kind of, we're told they pattern themselves and they rose up to this level of royalty where they're hobnobbing with royalty and advising queens and kings and monarchs. It's very, if they're advising governments and kings and queens, that tells you that they're above the governments and the kings and the queens, right? Because you go kind of upward to get advice, or they are just so influential and powerful that they can make things happen that nobody else can, that kings and queens and governments even can't make happen. And I think that's kind of hinted at in other chapters, as Nigel Watson's pointed out. Like there's a lot of hints at insider trading, that they were kind of rigging the markets. And in here, we just learned that the strategy was to get in and get out. And you would only really be able to do that reliably if you know when to get in and when to get out. So if you know an event's coming, or if you've pulled some strings, or you've kind of paved the way for a certain event to happen, and you can just buy low, sell high, before and after that event, or and you've got some kind of insider knowledge because of your network. Because I guess that they must have relied on intelligence gathering. They must have had like that quote as well that he just said about all the poor Jews being his servants. That was quite an interesting quote. Unless servant had a different kind of connotation back then. That to me reminded me of like who's the Dickens character who's got a lot of homeless boys running around? Is it Oliver Twist or something? I actually graduated with an English degree in English literature, believe it or not, and I don't know that, so I should know it. But that's what it sounded like to me, like intelligence networks, and poor people. They're kind of adjacent to, the staff, the help who work in these homes and these homes back then, and close to these families, they would have staff, wouldn't they, and live in like servants and drivers and cooks and all this kind of stuff. So sounds to me like he probably had some intelligence kind of aspect to his work and the family in general. But I think that's a book I would love to read about. But of course, they're not going to tell us that. They're just going to tell us that they're very good at business and very savvy, and they're very generous, and they're very just sort of amazing at what they do. Peter Estrada, just stumbled upon your channel, and a few days ago, I marathoned the previous chapters. Nice one. Very interesting. I wonder if you could dial your volume up a bit. And if closed caption isn't available, please. Yeah. I've had this concern about my volume before, and I'm not quite sure how to remedy it. I might have to buy another piece of kit, because currently I'm just going from the mic by a USB cable straight into the laptop, and I've got OBS and the gain is turned up. I've got another little program which came with the microphone from the manufacturers of the microphone. I'll just load that up now and see if I can give it a little boost there. Manual mic gain is on maximum. Yeah. So it could be that what I need is a preamp or something. I need to add it to my setup somehow, or maybe add a filter. But thank you for the feedback, and I appreciate it. I am aware of the issue. Peter Estrada also says they still do it. Yeah. Heidi says many staff 24/7. Yeah. And Heidi says the volume is great over the iPhone. That's good. That's good. Peter, maybe you're just going a bit deaf. Volume's fine for me. Yeah. I think it varies from, the headphones you're using, the devices you're listening on. But I actually have had a few people say it's a little bit low. Can we crank it up a bit? Can we increase it? So we'll see what we can do on that. 1 second here. So I don't know about you. We got 19 people watching. I'm feeling like we could probably just blitz out this last chapter right now instead of waiting another day to get through it, right? Because I don't know, like being a book lover and a reader, I tend to get faster when I'm getting towards the end of a book. I tend to be like, right, I'll finish off maybe the last quarter or the last fifth of a book just in one long sitting, stay up all night. I just got to get this finished, find out what happens and get to the end. Or I used to be like that when I read more fiction and novels. Nowadays I'm reading more sort of non-fiction, and it's more kind of history or health-based stuff. But this has got a nice little narrative to it, and I think we're on a good little roll tonight, and we got a nice sized crowd here, which is lovely, and I'm very grateful for. So yeah, let's just do it. If you can hang in there and you want to hear a little bit more. Yeah, we haven't even been going an hour yet. We can definitely do a bit more, can't we? Yeah, let's get it done. All right. Okay, final chapter then. And so as I mentioned before, just at the start of the stream, at the very top of the chat, there is a link to my Telegram group. And that group is where I post and I get people's feedback and input on what they would like me to read next. Currently, it's looking like, I think it was Bertrand Russell is in the lead on the poll. Yeah. So we might be reading a Bertrand Russell book next. But if you would prefer to hear about the Rockefellers, or if you would prefer a reading on the Lusitania event, then get in there and have a vote and have your say. It's pretty close. Only 7 votes so far, so it can still be changed. Fate is not sealed. All right, cool. Let's get on with chapter 7. Let's finish this thing. The Vienna Rothschilds. Fate had decided that Solomon Rothschild, the second son of Meyer Amschel, was to become the founder of one of the most important branches of the house. The head of the famous financial dynasty had put his eldest son, Anselm, in charge of the Frankfurt Bank, and it was necessary for the younger brother to seek a new field for the exercise of his business ability. During the years in which he had worked for the parent house, he had occasion to visit Vienna, as well as Berlin at times, and he was enabled to decide which of these cities he would be more suitable to his purpose. He carefully sought information about the financial world in both. In this way, he had become so familiar with the financial conditions in Germany that his brother Nathan, who already played a great part in the money world at London, called him to London in 1818 in order to entrust to him the arrangement of the Prussian loan. At this time, he was disposed to choose Berlin for his establishment. Anselm, however, was opposed to this. Prussia can stand a good deal, he said, even exhausting wars, but it can hardly stand two Rothschilds. He was himself quite able to deal with Berlin from Frankfurt, and it would be better for Solomon to go to Vienna. So Solomon went to the Austrian capital. The financial conditions of Austria and the great importance of Vienna as a centre persuaded the Rothschilds to establish a bank there as they had done at London. The heavy strain that Austria had sustained since 1792 in the wars against the French Republic and Napoleon had almost exhausted the financial resources of the country, and its economic confusion afforded the Rothschilds a welcome field for their specialty, the state loan. Austria was in dire need in this respect, and would not ask whether assistance came from Jewish hands or no. The Jews had always played a great part. My pages are sticking together there. Had always played a great part in financial matters in Austria, especially at Vienna. The nobles were wealthy, but held aloof from business, and the state was therefore compelled to turn to the Jews for the help it needed. Although their money was liberally used, however, they were still badly treated. They had to pay a heavy capitation tax, and, in order that they might be recognized, they had to wear a pointed hat and a yellow patch on the left arm. They were also restricted to certain quarters of the towns for their residence. At Vienna, the suburb of Leopoldstadt was set aside for them. They were afterwards expelled from this suburb in consequence of a bloody riot caused by the Vienna students, and the synagogues were turned into Christian churches. In the course of time, the city was compelled to put an end to this disorder, and the Jews returned to Vienna, though they were still deprived of the rights of citizenship. There was, therefore, unbounded astonishment when in the year 1783 the Emperor Joseph II gave the title of Baron to a Jew, the banker Joseph Michael Arnstein. He was the most prominent of all the workers on the Vienna Exchange, and at the time of the Vienna Congress he and his colleague Escels gave brilliant feasts which attracted the attention of the whole city. The Austrian treasury had done business with Arnstein and Escels and other important Viennese banks just before the Congress. When political difficulties now multiplied for the government, most of the other bankers declined to do further business with it, and Arnstein and Escels, who did not withdraw, came still further to the front. They were joined by Fries & Co., Gay Muller & Co., and Steiner & Co., and the four banking houses arranged a number of loans for the government during the wars. Steiner & Co. then withdrew in turn after making an enormous profit on the ground that Steiner was advanced in years and could no longer bear the strain of business. The Rothschilds took the place of the retiring firm just at a time when a new state loan was being negotiated. They arranged this in the form of a lottery, which proved very acceptable to the general public. It was thus the Rothschilds who induced the monarchy to initiate the state lotteries, which became so popular in Austria. The second son of Meyer Amschel was already at that time an Austrian nobleman, yet the Baron did not venture for 30 years to have a permanent residence in Vienna. He lived in a hotel so that he should not be compelled to submit to the authorities. He did not wish to be a citizen of Vienna. As a Jew, he could not possess the rights of citizenship, and he preferred to remain a foreigner, a citizen of the free city of Frankfurt. In time, however, Vienna wished to express its thanks in some way for the advantage which it had reaped from the establishment of the Rothschilds. The authorities wished to see a more cordial relation between the city and the financier, to see Solomon Rothschild not a stranger amongst them, but as much at home as Nathan was in London and James at Paris. A deputation, therefore, waited upon him at the beginning of 1843, with Count Kolowrat at its head, and offered him as a New Year's gift the freedom of the city. Thus, although his Jewish nationality forbade him to be even a modest citizen of the metropolis, his great services procured for Baron Solomon the title of honorary freeman, a distinction which he richly deserved for the unselfishness with which he had always sought to promote the interests of Vienna, and the practice of philanthropy that had won him general esteem and affection. He responded to the honor by establishing a foundation, the interest of which enabled youths of Vienna to make use of the Academy of Arts in that city. Baron Solomon arranged his first Austrian state loan with the Minister of Finance, Count Stadion, in the year 1820. On the 4th of April, he, in conjunction with David Parish, undertook to float a lottery loan for a sum of 4 million sterling. His second loan, amounting to more than £3 million, was also negotiated in cooperation with Parish. When, at the end of 1823, Austria again needed money, he found £2 million by means of London bankers. 6 years later, he again found £2 million for the Treasury, and a smaller loan was arranged 5 years afterwards. In the year 1839, he arranged a loan of £2.5 million, and in 1842, one amounting to £3.5 million. Austria was now in a position to demand better terms, but Baron Solomon still made a considerable profit on these transactions. The Austrian government was extremely grateful for his assistance. As Jentz says, Metternich always spoke in the most flattering terms of Baron Solomon's operations. And not only did statesmen speak of him with respect, other bankers and even indirect rivals did him justice. When, for instance, the head of the firm of Bethmann Brothers of Frankfurt went to Vienna in 1821, he visited Baron Solomon and said of him, "I recognize that the Rothschilds have been of very great assistance to governments, and I may honestly say that I have no jealousy or complaint on that account. Solomon, in particular, is a man of estimable character, and I have a very great regard for him. I know on good authority that Solomon Rothschild has said that the five brothers have made a net profit of £500,000. It is a case of the English proverb, money makes money." The cordial cooperation of the five brothers contributed materially to the prosperity of the firm. There was no grumbling and murmuring when the result of a transaction did not come up to their expectations. Solomon was liked by everybody on account of his ways and obliging disposition. No one ever left his presence without having received some assistance. He might have said in all truth that he had conquered Vienna. While he won one success after another, the firm of Fries & Co., which had at one time been associated with him in the Austrian loans, came to grief. The son was the head of the firm. Young Count Fries was, although he had inherited £670,000 from his father, and this sum and the discounting business gave him a large income, compelled in 1824 to fly to Paris, where he died soon afterwards. This catastrophe forced the other three associated houses, Gaymuller, Arnstein, and Eskells, and Rothschild. Gaymuller, Arnstein, and Eskells, and I never know if it's Arnstein or Arnstein, so apologies if I'm inconsistently pronouncing this word. Gaymuller, Arnstein, and Eskells, and Rothschild to take into partnership the Vienna banker and millionaire Baron Georg Sina, and from that time the Austria state loans were arranged by these four firms in cooperation. The Gaymuller firm, however, got into difficulties. Indeed, a warrant was issued against them for dishonest dealing with the monies entrusted to them, and they were called to account. The successors of Steiner & Co., Schick Brothers, also became bankrupt, and many other banks wavered. The Rothschilds alone stood firm, and seemed to be all-powerful in business. Baron Solomon gave his attention to other enterprises besides state loans and banking. He not only advanced considerable sums to the nobles of Austria and Hungary and members of the international aristocracy, but founded limited companies and railways from which he made large profits. As Weil wrote about the middle of the last century, Rothschild is the head of the railways, even as opposed to the government. They are controlled by a society, and this society is controlled by one man who can do what he pleases with its members. This man is Rothschild." End quote. Since that date, the private companies have nearly all passed into the government's hands, but at that date, the chief commercial lines were subject to the control of the Rothschilds. Amongst others, Solomon created the oldest railway company in Austria, the Emperor Ferdinand's Northern Line, and was thus the man to introduce the locomotive into the country. The railway was planned, it is true, by Francis Xavier Rieppel, but Rothschild provided the capital that was necessary for its construction. It was one of the chief characteristics of the Rothschilds that they so quickly grasped the situation and adopted sound projects. Baron Solomon had his share of this gift of the family and was one of the first to see the importance of the new means of reducing distances. In the year 1836, when the Vienna station of the line was built, a statue of Baron Solomon was erected by the company in the waiting hall. The finest sculptor of the time executed it. It was of life size and of Carrara marble, and the pedestal bore the inscription, quote, "The Emperor Ferdinand's Northern Railway Society, to its founder, Baron Solomon Rothschild." End quote. On the other side of the pedestal were the words, quote, "Founded this railway, the first in Austria to use steam." End quote. Rothschild also undertook the financing of mines and smelting works, not only in Austria, but in other countries also, even as far away as Spain. He farmed the quicksilver mines of Almaden after the United Spanish banks, under the title Banco Español de San Fernando, had failed to secure the undertaking. Baron Solomon's Madrid agents prevented them from obtaining control of it, as this would have made them dangerous rivals of the Austrian quicksilver mines, which produced large quantities of mercury every year. The struggle ended in a compromise and partnership. A certain uniformity of prices was agreed upon, and the Rothschilds secured a larger profit. The traditional look of the Rothschilds never left Baron Solomon. For instance, when, in the month of November 1836, a great fire raged at New York and threatened to destroy the whole streets, the Rothschild sulfur store, which was in one of the threatened streets, was uninjured. Not a building in that street took fire. The remarkable fever for speculation which was rife at that time also contributed to their fortune. Every day witnessed new foundations, and wherever there was a prospect of profit, they hastened to take large batches of shares. They played the leading part in the establishment of banks, limited companies, and industrial enterprises, as they could often make more by constructing a railway than in arranging a state loan. According to a contemporary, they amassed a sum of more than £20 million by commercial and industrial enterprises and the creation of railways. Baron Solomon also extended his operations as far as Trieste, where he controlled the market in conjunction with the firm of Marpergo. He took the leading part in every financial operation in Austria, and it could be shown that state loans had always in some way to pass through his hands. On more than one occasion, the circumstances of the empire were confidentially submitted to him. He had free access to ministers, and Metternich was his special protector. The relation between the two men had assumed a friendly character, but Rothschild did not hesitate at times to oppose the powerful minister. An occasion of this kind occurred in 1831, at the time of the Belgian Revolution, when a bitter and secret struggle took place between the statesman and the financier, the more dangerous as it was concealed by a show of politeness. Metternich pressed imperiously for money from Rothschild in order to be able to make an armed intervention. Rothschild hesitated and deferred his reply, as he wanted first to learn from his brothers at Paris and London whether this intervention would disturb their business. Metternich became very impatient, and at last secret instructions came from Nathan and James that Solomon must be very careful. He must on no account supply money for the war, as England and France were on the side of Belgium. At this, Baron Solomon resisted all the pressure of Metternich. He refused the money, and Metternich had to abandon his plan of armed intervention. Rothschild's refusal must have prevented the sacrifice of many human lives. Metternich was, no doubt, very angry with the Baron for refusing his assistance, but he was not wholly estranged, chiefly owing to the mediation of Metternich's third wife, the Countess Zichy Ferraris. Solomon had won the regard of the great diplomatist's wife, acting on the principle that little gifts maintain the life of friendship. Through her, he came into touch with the members of the Hungarian aristocracy, as we can trace in ledgers of the firm. They were more in need of money than ever at that time, and frequently mortgaged their estates. Prince Esterhazy had about £540,000 from Rothschild, Count Hunyadi about £40,000, Count Sandor £56,000, Count Széchenyi £166,000, and so on. The Rothschilds wished to enlarge their capital by dealing in landed property as well as money. Both in Germany, France, and Austria, they bought extensive estates and were in many places allowed to place an entail on the property. On one occasion, Baron Solomon received an even more conspicuous proof of imperial favour. He had rendered some important service to the country, and the emperor received him in private audience and gave him a ring from his own finger. The ring was not of much intrinsic value to a millionaire, but Rothschild was greatly concerned when, some time afterwards, he lost it after taking a bath. He promised a princely reward to anyone who discovered it, and when the chief attendant at the bathing establishment found it and restored it to him, he gave her a sum amounting to nearly £600, with which she set up a business of her own. The Viennese, especially the Jewesses at Vienna, had a curious superstition in regard to Rothschild's hand. They literally believed that he turned into gold everything that he touched, as Baron Solomon himself discovered on one occasion. It was a very busy day on the exchange, and the porter informed the Baron that a lady, who would not give her name, wished to see him. He was an amiable and polite man, especially to ladies, and he hastened at once to his mysterious visitor. A lady, veiled thickly to her feet, was waiting for him, and Baron Solomon, thinking that he had to deal with a higher type of beggar, took out his purse. The lady shook her head, however, and said, "I would not have come to beg, Baron, but to ask a favour." "What is it?" "My poor husband died 2 months ago, just before my daughter was betrothed. As you know, we Jews do not like a wedding during a year of mourning." "Do you want me to give you something for her outfit or her dowry?" asked the Baron, who was anxious to get back to his important business on the exchange. "I'm very grateful to you, but, fortunately, my husband has left us in fair circumstances. We are not rich, but we are not poor." "What do you want then, madam, please?" "I have a favour to ask of you. I cannot give my daughter a dowry, but would like to give her something for luck." Baron Rothschild was impatient at wasting his time on trifles with a Jewish widow while the fight proceeded on the exchange. "Well, what is it?" he said, again fingering his purse. The woman seized his arm. "No, Baron, I don't want money, but something to bring good luck to my daughter, as it will do better than your money." "What do you want?" the Baron said in astonishment. "My husband, Baron," she said quietly, "left me 3 Rothschild lottery bonds. I am giving them to my daughter, and, as I know what a lucky hand you have, I beg you to touch them, and I am sure that we shall then win a good prize." The Baron touched the papers for her, and she went away. The younger generation of the Rothschilds were more disposed to enjoy social life, especially in their earlier years. They were not attracted to the art of making money, and, indeed, the head of the family allowed none of them to interfere in the business as long as he lived. They had therefore plenty of time for social distractions and began to move in the most exclusive circles at Vienna. Baron Anselm, Solomon's son, led the gilded youths of the town. He used to drive always in a 2-horsed carriage and pay the coachman 4 or 5 times his fare. It did not threaten the stability of the firm, but Baron Solomon greatly disliked his son's conduct. One day, Baron Solomon needed to get some place as quickly as possible and took the first decent carriage he found. It happened to be the carriage which his son generally used, and the man looked forward to receiving an excellent tip. He was almost speechless with astonishment when it came to paying. The Baron handed him the precise fare for the journey, and not a penny more. The coachman made a long face, and stood looking at the coin in his hand. "Isn't that the correct fare?" the Baron asked him. "Oh, yes, the fare is correct," the man muttered. "But the young Baron would have given me 3 or 4 times as much." "Indeed," said the Baron. "But, you see, my son has a wealthy father, and I have not." Baron Anselm had had an excellent education. He studied at Berlin University, and he had almost as good a business capacity as his uncle James of Paris. He had served his apprenticeship at Paris, and had then gone to transact important business at Berlin, Copenhagen, Brussels, and other cities where the Rothschilds had no establishments. It was clear that he would be a good businessman, and the family selected him to go to Frankfurt when the advanced age of his uncle Anselm made it advisable for him to have a younger assistant. He remained there many years until in 1880 his father died and he was needed at Vienna. Baron Solomon had died suddenly on July the 28th in his 79th year. In spite of his advanced age, he retained his vigour and a remarkable freshness of mind, and was very active even in his later years. He had only 1 son and 1 daughter by the marriage which he contracted with Caroline Stern. His daughter Betty had married Baron James of Paris, and his son Anselm married Charlotte, the eldest daughter of his uncle Nathan. Baron Anselm took over the management of the Vienna house and continued the work which his father had begun in Austria. He was 52 years old at the time, and that fact and the unfortunate economic circumstances of the time explain how it was that he entered upon few new operations during the 20 years in which he remained at the head of the firm, and was content to maintain the old connections. The existing business was, therefore, quietly developed, and, as extensive operations were no longer contemplated, he had time to follow his personal inclinations. He was much interested in art, and had a very valuable collection of pictures, statues, and other artistic treasures, especially enamels and gold work, for which he had a special museum erected. He was at the same time a good friend of the poor of Vienna, as we may gather from the many institutions which they owe to his generosity. The Viennese have to thank him for the establishment of a hospital, and foundling hospital, an institute for the blind, an institute for the deaf and dumb, and a charitable association. He was throughout life a member of the Austrian Upper House, to which he had been called on April the 18th, 1861. At the beginning of his career at Vienna, Baron Anselm had shown considerable vigour. After the death of his father, Austria, which had created the Southern Railway with national funds, wished to dispose of this enterprise with certain privileges to a company. The company was got together by the initiative of Baron Anselm. It consisted of the Paris, London, and Vienna Rothschilds, and took over the railway. It also acquired the Central Italian lines and had a capital of £10 million. In the course of time, it connected the 2 sets of lines. Although these transactions did not bring a large profit immediately, they ultimately proved of great value to the Rothschilds. The construction of the Austrian Credit Bank for Trade and Commerce, with a capital of £4.2 million, falls in the same period, the year 1855. Baron Anselm had a large share in this, and he sold on the exchange the shares of the new bank, which began at a nominal price of £17, soon arose to £34, and for some time continued to rise. This rapid advance was, however, unnatural in many respects, and it led to the great crash, exposing the Vienna grandchildren of Meyer Amschel to the fiercest attacks. The marvellous success of the new credit bank had inspired the formation of a large number of money businesses, the shares of which also rose very rapidly. But, as these new businesses had lamentably weak foundations, the greater part of them failed at the first financial crisis. Baron Anselm had recognized in good time this tendency to excessive speculation, and even noticed the symptoms of an approaching crisis. He had himself speculated on the high rates, but he was the first to unload his shares when he saw the evil coming. He began to sell quietly in the last days of March 1873, and prices began to fall in April, owing to the enormous sales. People were alarmed on the exchange, but at first they attributed these sales to over-anxiety on Rothschild's part, and thought that there were other reasons for the fall. Then came May, with a worse rather than a better situation on the exchange. On May the 8th, 1873, a broker asked Julius von Goldschmidt, an agent of Baron Anselm, to take up securities to the amount of £42,000, which he had bought for a certain date. He would afterwards buy the papers back from the Rothschilds at a fixed price. Goldschmidt said aloud, £40,000. All the banks together are scarcely worth that. His words fell like a cry of alarm on the nervous and apprehensive exchange. Prices went down at a jump. No one would buy or exchange, and every minute was announced the failure of some new financier or firm. The words of Rothschild's agent acted like a spark upon a barrel of powder. At once there was a fearful explosion with the most disastrous consequences. In one day, an appalling number of banks and mercantile houses were ruined, but the Rothschild firm came undamaged out of the catastrophe. Baron Anselm Rothschild was in his 72nd year when he died on July the 27th, 1874. 19 years after the death of his father. He left 5 children, and his will directed that the control of the business in Vienna should pass to his youngest son Albert. The daughters Julia, Matilda, and Louisa all married the sons of Rothschilds in accordance with the wish of old Meyer Amschel. Ferdinand, the eldest son, married Eveline, the daughter of Baron Lionel of London. He migrated to England and was naturalized there. He took no interest in business matters either at London or Vienna. He had no feeling for business at all, and it was on that account that the father chose his brother Albert, who was 5 years younger, to succeed him. Baron Ferdinand had no wish to traffic with his millions and devoted himself to social life in England. Like the other English Rothschilds, he was on very good terms with the Prince of Wales, afterwards Edward VII, who was often entertained at his country house. The younger brother Albert was quite the opposite of Ferdinand in point of character. He was a thorough businessman. He liked to operate on a large scale, and in this respect resembled Nathan of London. He did his work as head of the Vienna house in such a way that, in order to keep his finger on the pulse of the money market, he obtained an almost sovereign influence on the inner life of the Austrian National Bank, now known as the Austro-Hungarian Bank. This brought Baron Albert into closer touch with Hungary, and he soon afterwards founded a petroleum refinery at Fiume. Hungary was indebted to him for the conversion, in 1881, of its 6% stock, £50 million, into 4%. He is said to have made a profit of from £12 to £13 million. This profit was not made directly out of the conversion, but by Rothschild accepting the stock on his own account and selling it afterwards at a higher price. The sales of these securities were conducted so skillfully and opportunely that Rothschild had none of them left, and so did not suffer when, on January the 22nd, 1882, the crash followed Black Sunday, and the price of the funds fell 25 shillings below the rate of issue. Black Sunday, or the Bonto crash, as that calamitous day is called, did not impair the position of the Rothschilds, although Bontu had opened a veritable campaign against the Vietnamese financiers on the exchange. Bontu won a number of small successes, but on the day of the great battle, January the 22nd, Rothschild's opponents sustained a crushing defeat. Bontu had some years before been general director of the Austrian Southern Railway, and had gradually become the representative of the Vienna Rothschilds in that lucrative branch of business. His high position gave him every opportunity to study Rothschild's business methods, and this gave him the idea of imitating him and becoming a Rothschild himself. His confidence increased when he at length came to an understanding with a number of members of the higher financial world who had long resented the great influence of the Rothschilds and were quite willing to help to destroy it. Bonto undertook to do this. At the first opportunity, he threw off the mask of devoted servant and broke with the Rothschilds. He formed a coalition against them, at the head of which were the Austrian Estate Bank and the Parisian Union Generale. With the aid of these, he was to drive the Rothschilds from their throne. The Rothschilds soon realized the situation, especially as the Union Generale made a stand against the new Hungarian stock and attempted to lower the price of it. They thought that they could defeat their opponents at one blow by depreciating the price of the shares in the bank, and so they sold the shares of the Union Generale at increasingly low prices on the Bourse at Paris. In this, however, they were defeated. Bontu had perceived their intention and held back all the shares, which he could easily do as they were only nominally on the market, and the Rothschilds could not deliver more shares in the union when the term expired. That was a blow to the Rothschilds. They did not suffer any great material loss, but for a time they seemed to have abandoned the idea of fighting. This, however, was not the real reason for their reserve. It was due to the death of Baron Alphonse, the head of the Paris house. Baron Albert was compelled to wait until he was fully informed of the situation by his colleagues at Paris. When he at last received his information, he turned upon Bontu and his associates with all his strength, and before the end of the 1881, one of the banks that had joined the league against him, the Banque de Lyon et de la Loire, came to grief. This began the crisis. It spread from Lyon and culminated at Vienna on Black Sunday, when Bontu and his associates were utterly routed. Baron Albert was one of the first to hasten to the relief of the money market, and it was owing to his intervention that the crisis was so quickly overcome, both in Austria and France. He had won a great victory, and his firm was as solid as ever. But, however great his financial success and his merits were, the Vienna court, which had conferred the title of baron on his grandfather, would not admit the Jewish financier to its circle. His soirees, which rivaled those of any crowned head in display and luxury, were never attended by members of the imperial family. All his invitations were politely declined. On one occasion, when the whole of the archdukes and archduchesses had sent a refusal, the soiree had to be postponed on account of measles. The wits of Vienna gave the abandoned festival the name of Refusal Measles. Baron Albert quietly endured their malice. He was so conscious of the greatness of the name of Rothschild that he did not regard the affair as a question of small personal vanity, but rather as a trial of strength, an attempt to see whether the old prejudices were yet disposed to give way to modern ideas. The Hungarian premier at the time, Koloman Tisza, understood this, and he induced the court to admit Baron Albert to its circle. He remained at the head of the Vienna firm until February the 10th, 1911. His death, in his 67th year, was attributed to grief at the suicide of his youngest son Oscar, who shot himself out of disappointment in love. The father was so deeply shaken by this catastrophe that he never recovered. His son Ludwig, now 30 years old, is the present head of the Vienna firm of the Rothschilds. The end. And that is The Romance of the Rothschilds by Ignatius Balla from 1913. So one thing I forgot to comment on actually was how they keep mentioning that they came from a house with a green shield on it and not a house with a red shield. And maybe he mentioned this and I forgot in an earlier chapter how the green shield became red. So I'm not sure what happened there. But what do you think? Got 17 people watching. How's it going? I'll have a little look at the chats. Oh, so somebody asked about the article that I showed earlier, how it's blocked for you. How do you get to look at it? There's a website that you can put the URL of the article. You put that URL into the website, and then it lets you read it. And that website is archive.ph. And I use it all the time, especially when I'm putting my long form Hayes Reviews Lives streams together. It's really handy. And then the article, the good thing about it as well is it's kind of like the Wayback Machine. You can see older versions of web pages, and so you can catch them out when they've gone back in and edited and changed things since publishing it. And quite a few times I've found articles where they've changed the headline and kind of updated it with a preferred wording of some description or another. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful. I don't know who it was that asked about that, but I just caught that before. So let's have a look. Adam says, your viewers are increasing every stream. Thumbs up. Yeah, that's really nice to see, isn't it? I'm glad people are joining in and taking part and finding something useful to take away from this. And I think I'm getting better at my reading and narrating as well. You know, I still like some of the, like this 100-year-old English is actually pretty tricky in parts, but the more you do it, the kind of better you get. And so hopefully that's transferring, and the it's easier on the ears for you guys who are tuning in and listening. So Heidi says, I'm sick, so this is a great way to spend downtime. Thank you. You're very welcome, and I hope you get better very soon from whatever is ailing you. But yeah, if I'm ever laid up or ill or tired, or in the past, maybe hungover or something, it would be podcasts and duvet days and long walks and just taking it easy. I'm the same. I like listening to stuff. So I hope you feel better soon though, Heidi. Gwen Weston says, the Eastern European Jews used to refer to him as Der Frommer Rothschild, the pious Jew. Ah, alrighty. Interesting. Yeah, the whole family, like butter wouldn't melt, according to this guy, this writer. They're lucky, they're shrewd, they're generous, philanthropic. The city burns down and their building is left standing. There's a crash on the exchange, and they're the only ones who haven't got any money there, and they managed to swerve it and survive it. So I don't know. This family are blessed, that's for sure. Somebody's looking out for them from either up there or maybe down there. I don't know, but yeah, an incredible amount of luck and business acumen, and like, what are the odds of just basically a coin collector in a ghetto just giving birth to 5 sons and a whole lineage of people who just become amazingly fantastic at business. It's the kind of story it's the kind of like origin story that reminds me of the likes of like Bill Gates, like, oh, he just invented something in his garage, or Steve Jobs, or Elon Musk. These kind of characters, they always get portrayed as sort of self-made geniuses, and the amount of backing and support that they get from their parents or families or intelligence services or governments is always kind of left out of that part, that conveniently left out of the narrative. And this kind of reminds me of that a little bit. It's sort of like, well, they just pulled themselves up from nothing by their bootstraps and became so powerful that they can poke Prince Charles in his chest. and yeah, it's I think there's a lot missing from this particular version of the story anyway. Peter Estrada says, I'm an old man. Do you know what? Like, I wonder if I was actually, when I was reading there, I was thinking about the joke about going deaf, and I was like, oh, I hope that wasn't rude. I hope I didn't offend anyone or upset anyone with that quip, so I'm glad you took that well and found it funny. I think I'm going deaf as well a little bit. Too many years of headphones and podcasts, and Peter, let's see, I'm not far wrong. At the risk of being nosy, are you related to Eric? I don't even know who Eric Estrada is, so that conversation's gone right over my head. Adam gives me some claps, says, thanks for that tip. You're very welcome, sir. May you put it to good use and learn lots. It helps, definitely. I mean, I don't... What have we got? I think... Well, I shouldn't really talk about how to do that anymore, should I? I'm not far wrong, says, very interesting, thank you. Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here as usual. And that is it. That's our second book that we've read through now on the live streams. We did Open Conspiracy by H.G. Wells. We have done this introduction to the Rothschilds. And what is going to be next? Well, that is up to the members of the Telegram group, which is linked under the video and also at the very top of the chat. So if anybody wants to get in there and have a say, cast a vote, and I promise I will read whatever the outcome is according to that vote. The caveat is I get to pick the 3 books that are on the poll, and I also get to cast a vote as well. And I'm not allowed to see the results of the poll until I cast my vote. So it's kind of a bit, I do get to influence it, obviously. But I think they're all valuable books to get on the record. They all kind of, I think the more we read and the more we kind of spend time to get to know these, the more it'll link and flesh out the picture of, what I just call the big picture. And it does go back this far, 100 years or so, back to the time of Cecil Rhodes, back to the time of Lord Milner, Bertrand Russell, H.G. Wells. There's that thread of continuity that goes through it all by way of what's he called? Henry Kissinger, whose mentor was a Rhodes Scholar, And that's in the book New World Order, which I reviewed on this channel. So that gives that continuity there. And then Henry Kissinger became friends, was friends with Evelyn de Rothschild, who was advising the Queen of England. So you can map out this network by reading these books, and particularly the writers like H.G. Wells and Bertrand Russell. They're the ones who are kind of telling you what the plan is. The Huxleys, Aldous Huxley, but not only him. You got Julian Huxley. He wrote about the purpose and philosophy of UNESCO, which very few people who back and push and work towards the fulfillment of the UNESCO and the UN agenda, they don't even know that Julian Huxley wrote that book and was the first director of UNESCO, I think. But then you've also got T.H. Huxley, so their grandfather, who was Darwin's bulldog. And I've got a biography about him, because he was kind of considered a heretic at the time because he was pushing Darwinian evolution. And there's a 2-part biography out, and only 1 part showed up. And this was kind of off the back of my last 3 book orders, which were actually something was weird happened with them. Let's just say. So I started to get a bit worried. I'm kind of like, oh, someone's messing with my orders now, so maybe I won't order any books for a while. But yeah, that's pretty much it for tonight's stream. So thank you all for being here in the chat, for participating, for the thumbs up. It's really great. I really love doing this stuff. Hope you have a wonderful Monday evening. Not sure when I'm going to be, when I'll start. Maybe I'll give it 24 hours. So I won't do a live stream tomorrow. I'll give it 24 hours for people to cast votes on the Telegram chat, because there's like 40 people in there or so. And then I will put something in the calendar and send some messages out for, what will that be? That'll be Wednesday night, won't it? We'll kick off the new book on Wednesday. So enjoy yourselves, take care of yourselves and each other. And until next time, I will tell you and wish you good times. I hope your health improves if you're struggling with anything health related at the moment. Stay warm. It's been pretty chilly. It's been very windy as well where I am in the northwest of England. So, make sure your wheelie bins don't blow away. I had to go chasing after my recycling bin. It was off down the street earlier today. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much again, and God bless.